Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today we've got a very special guest to talk about what's been happening in the Australian building and construction industry. So that's Chris, who's the CEO and founder of BuildSort. So thanks for joining us, Chris.
Thanks, guys. Yep.
Well, I guess the first question I have for you is a bit of your background, because this is something that's been in the media a lot lately, but the construction standards in Australia and the residential and commercial boom, I guess, as well, it's been a hot topic lately.
Yeah, so I've been involved in the industry for many years now. So I'm a structural engineer. 19 years I've been in the industry, and I've seen all the problems and what's been happening throughout this industry for a long time. So when I first learned about blockchain and what that can do for the industry, I took a real interest, and I figured this was the way to fix everything. Not just like a couple of band-aids on a few things, but basically I think we can fix the industry and make sure that everything is working perfectly. There's all sorts of problems within the industry, so simplifying the legal disputes. Now, the industry is probably one of the biggest with legal disputes in any other industry. The contracts, so every project comes together around a whole bunch of different individuals that need to work together, and they all have a contract of what they have to do with all their obligations and how they get paid and how they get penalised. That also has the payment has been a problem in some of these cases as well. With there's lots of legislation coming out around security of payments.
Yeah.
So the subcontractors getting paid and getting paid on time. That has brought around a lot of red tape, you could say, and the industry has come back and saying that, well, all this red tape is actually going to add 1 to 2% of the building value back into, to basically administer all these contracts. You're starting to get into compliance of materials. So we've had problems with cladding. There's been lead in plumbing items in the Perth Children's Hospital. There's been asbestos, the wrong concrete being delivered on Opal Towers, a whole bunch of other things.
So before you keep going here, Chris, I was just going to say, is this a result of the housing boom or bubble, whatever you want to call it, with the rush to pump out more apartments and buildings? I know they sort of privatised a lot of the standards that got signed off, or how does this all sort of come about?
Yeah, so what happened is about 20 years ago, they deregulated the industry. So they brought in private building surveyors. That was to basically help cut some red tape. But what's happened is, you can see what's happened is basically the builders are employing the building surveyors. Now, the building surveyors have to basically run, make sure that the builders are compliant.
Yeah.
That's, what do you think is going to happen?
You're getting into a bit of a conflict of interest, and the thing.
Absolutely.
The thing this reminds me of is during the financial crisis, where the rating agencies had to rate the bonds, and they got paid a lot of money to do it, and they knew they weren't AAA rated, but if they didn't do it, they'd go to the guy next door and get paid. And this sounds like the exact same thing.
It's exactly the same thing. So we've had this for a number of years. It's progressively getting worse. We're starting to see it more and more. The media picked it up. If it wasn't for Opal Towers and everyone being kicked out of their apartment on New Year's Eve, on Christmas Eve, we probably wouldn't be talking about this now. Timing was pretty good with what happened at Grenfell Towers in London, where all the flammable cladding.
Yes.
So they're kind of two different problems, but it's kind of shed a lot of light on the industry and what's happening. The government has been writing reports, and they've Shergold Weir report came out, which had like about 25 different recommendations, and out of that there was a recommendation of actually putting all of this information together and putting it on blockchain. So that was one of the recommendations come out of that. which is pretty exciting. It's definitely the industry that requires it, just as much as the financial industry. There's just as much regulation, and the way that it's regulated is like you said, it's very similar. So it's the way forward by far.
Yeah, it's exciting to get that feedback as someone, and we'll get to what the project is doing later on. But I know you mentioned it's been in the media a lot lately, but I've also heard that there's a lot of owners of the actual apartment complex or the individual apartments that are being told to keep this hush-hush, because if it gets out, that's going to decrease the value of their apartment, which a lot of people have as investments.
Well, that's right. What do you do about that? It's a pretty bad situation to be in, to be one of these owners of these apartments. Now, we can't do much about what's happened in the past, but moving forward we can. So the putting all of this information onto a blockchain, that everything has been taken care of throughout the build process. This is something that's required. Think about your car logbook.
Yeah.
We don't have that for buildings. So there's no logbook for buildings. So one of the other recommendations that come out of this report was to actually have a logbook of what's happening in the building. So how was it built? What was put into it? How do you maintain it? Because there's also fire regulations, which requires maintenance. And a lot of these buildings, their strata board has not been doing anything to maintain all of these things.
Yeah, a lot of our audience are probably not familiar with blockchain as well, because we do our housing and economy updates. So I guess for people at home, that public, transparent, open ledger that has a permanent record, it's all those features of a blockchain database. Because at the moment we're hearing stories of the 2 years past and that person's no longer liable, or 10 years ago that company shut down, or we don't know who they were. Is that really solving all those problems, or is it still going to be some timeframes and things that doesn't fix?
So, blockchain never really goes just by itself. There's always another accompanying technology. So with construction, we generally build things with 3D models. So these 3D models become like a database as well. So you can actually click on the items and get some information back on them. So let's say you clicked on the air conditioning units, you can find out who the maker was, what the warranty is, where you get all the replacement parts, all of those kind of things. So that can go into this.
Would a good example here be the fireproof doors? I heard that's one of the things they've been trying to cut back on and get the cheaper models. And if that was on a blockchain, that would be more of a red flag straight away than 10 years later.
Absolutely. But not only that, so with this logbook, it's more of an enabler of what is coming up in the future of real estate, like fractionalisation. Now, if you're going to buy an asset, you want to pretty much know that asset has been maintained. How was it built? All of these kind of things. What's the rating of the building? Perhaps have a rating system to say, well, this is a AAA rated building because it's been built all up to specifications, it's been maintained over its time. Now, that is probably the most exciting thing that could come out of what we're doing with BuildSort.
Yeah, and again, for people at home, you showed me a 3D model, and this was a while ago now, so I'm assuming you've got this even better, but a 3D model where you could actually click on the individual beams and see where they've come from. It's all on the blockchain. So whether you're an investor or, I guess, a regulator, that's all out there transparently on a blockchain.
Yeah, so we've taken it a little bit further than that now. We're getting into smart legal contracts. So smart legal contracts is making sure that everyone's done their obligations, and that could be that, okay, I've claimed that I've done this work, and then someone can come along and inspect it, make sure that it's all up to specification, and we have all the specifications on there as well, so we can see that what is required, have they delivered the right materials, and then we can make the payments. So it's automating a lot of that process as well.
So with a lot of the cracking and the cladding, is this more isolated to Melbourne and Sydney that had the apartment boom, or is this something you've seen fairly widespread?
So Deakin Griffiths universities carried out a report, and they found that they only worked on the east coast, but they found defects in New South Wales, Victoria, and Queensland. Now, over that whole report, they found out of the buildings they inspected, 97% of the ones in New South Wales had defects. Now, they could have been water damage, structural defects, the cladding, or even the fire rate systems. So you get into Victoria, that becomes 74%, and in Queensland, 71%.
Pretty astronomical numbers, and for people at home, the water damage can be the silent killer. If you've got a bit of mold in the walls, or you don't know it in the children's bedroom, they get asthma or even worse. So,
well, it's the cladding and the structural ones are the pricey ones. So we're looking at defects in Opal Towers now. The repair bill for that is up to 24 million and still counting. The developers only allowed for 1 million set aside for any defects in any of their properties.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see where this is going. When you get into structural defects as well, so something could move and that could open up a window which lets more water in. So you also start getting into water damage as well. You also have to basically gut the buildings to get it to a point where you can actually start repairing it, which means everyone has to move out. So there's some big problems with the industry when it comes to structural issues. So there was even in Northern Territory, there was some problems with one structural engineer in particular, and he's run up, I think it's about 9 buildings that have got structural defects. So there's all these other problems, like because we've deregulated the industry, there's actually no, except for Queensland. Queensland's the only one that has licensing for professionals within the industry as well.
So what happens in those circumstances if the builder has maybe had a lot of other projects and now housing's turned down a bit and they get this bill for 24 million? How does this work once they're insolvent or something like that happens?
Well, so there's no insurance required on a building that's over 4 stories high, which it kind of means that the owners are left with the bill. There has been some talk of some of the states actually setting up their own fund to be able to loan that out to the strata, which is a loan. It's not a gift. So it basically is buyer beware in these apartments.
That's a pretty crazy situation where taxpayers might end up footing the bill for these dodgy people that have signed off on during the apartment boom.
Well, the apartment boom, it's been going on. There was 260,000 apartments built in New South Wales since 2000. So there's a lot of apartments out there. Potentially could have problems. We're hoping for the next boom that we can help out with that and make sure that it all comes together really nicely and those owners can have some confidence in the buildings that they have.
Yeah. So do you want to maybe, we've touched on a lot of aspects of it, but for people at home, what is BuildSort sort of stepping out to do?
Yeah, so we're looking at a smart legal contracts platform. So when you get into the contract with each other, but we link that contract back to the 3D model. Now, that 3D model tells you what your scope of work is, so what parts you have to do. And as you complete those off, you check them off. We can check the compliance on those. We also get into what happens if they're delayed. So if they're behind schedule, how they might get penalised, and basically running everything really smoothly. It also can get into the tracking and tracing because the contracts can go a few layers deep. You can see where the materials have come from.
Yeah.
So that can take care of a bunch of problems with the likes of modern slavery is one of the biggest things that hasn't really been talked about yet. But Modern Slavery Act is making sure that all the materials that you have not been touched by any form of modern slavery, so child labour. And a lot of our building materials do come from places in Asia. So has child labour been in there? There's stone products that come from India and Bangladesh and all of these kind of places. There's debt bondage. Have these people been brought into debt bondage? Is there human trafficking involved? So you can track where the origin is. It's a halfway measure to get to the full modern slavery problem, but we're almost getting there. Then security of payments is the other one. So like I said, 1 to 2% additional on your project value. Now, all of this combined, there's been reports by McKinsey Global that suggests that this level of digitisation could bring building costs down by 45%. Now, whether that would be shared throughout the industry, who knows? But or if it would get back to the consumer's pocket, I don't know. I imagine it would probably get eaten up by profits throughout the supply chain. But it probably required in the industry, because there's so many insolvencies as well. When these builders are only getting a 2% margin, they need to start doing. We're in a race to the bottom, really, on pricing, on anything to do with the construction industry. And where we are now and what's happening is probably a big wake-up call.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'll make sure I put the links below to the 3D models and a few of those things that you showed me, as well as the website for people to check out. But do you ever put your investor hat on and see that these problems have sort of made people really question buying apartments as a great investment, particularly in Melbourne and Sydney?
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't be buying an apartment. No.
That figure 97% is just staggering, isn't it?
It is. But the property prices are probably overinflated anyway. Maybe some reality check is required there. And going forward, look, I don't think this is going to hurt the industry going forward. I think it's the reality check that we've required. The government hasn't wanted to step in for so many years. This latest report, which was written, is one of many. So the same recommendations have been handed out to government for a long time. And it's really hitting home now since the media's really taken it up. These problems have been happening for a long time.
I mean, we covered it in our documentary about how they get a lot of revenue from stamp duty and that sort of thing, land tax, and these reports were done same as the Royal Commission. There was lots of red flags, but it just kind of got pushed to the side for 10 years or so, and now it's really all coming to the surface.
Absolutely.
Any final thoughts for people at home, mate? I hope that shed a light on the industry.
Final thoughts. Look, I think the industry it's in recovery mode at the moment. There's some changes that need to happen, and they will happen. But property is always and always will be a great investment. We're not making any more of it, so it's kind of like a Bitcoin. It just needs this level of compliance and transparency to make sure that we can give the confidence back to the consumers.
That's interesting. I've definitely thought that before about, inner city London or Japan in terms of property, but as Australia being so wide open, I've never really thought of that scarcity argument so much here, but interesting you say that.
Well, everyone wants to live close to the centre, so there is scarcity wherever you look.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, guys, I'll put the links to those 3D models and the website. Make sure you check out BuildSort, and I'm sure we'll have you on again in future. So thanks for coming on, mate.
No worries. Thanks a lot.
Cheers, guys.